Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a masterclass, a highly satirical one, of course, on the exact economic policies politicians use to successfully, and I mean comprehensively, tank their own country's economy. We're talking about the irresistible allure of artificially weak currencies, deeply negative interest rates, constant populist stimulus, and sky-high public debt. Sounds like a recipe for a booming utopia, right? Well, as the data will show us, it's actually a mathematically guaranteed economic disaster. Okay, let's open the playbook and quickly run through our agenda for total economic ruin. Step 1 is borrow and spend. Step 2, magic money trees. Step 3, crash the currency. Then we'll visit our Hall of Fame inductee, Argentina, before wrapping up with the inevitable catastrophe. Let's get into it. You know what the ultimate irony of this entire playbook is? Defying basic math is actually a wonderfully bipartisan hobby. As researchers from the University of Washington perfectly point out, populists from the left and the right use these exact same tactics. They promise to save everyday people, but basically end up dropping a massive economic anvil right on their heads. So, step 1, borrow and spend. If you want to win an election right now, the first move is hilariously simple. Just aggressively spend money you absolutely do not have. Don't worry about the balance sheet, just focus on the applause. Both sides of the political aisle absolutely love this step. They just dress it up in different outfits. Columbia University research shows us that left-wing populists tend to wildly expand government spending to force domestic demand and redistribute wealth. Right-wing populists? Well, they love unfunded tax cuts, heavy tariffs, and massive farmer subsidies. Either way, the deficit explodes, politicians buy favor, and that massive long-term sovereign debt? Yeah, that's tomorrow's problem. But here's the buzzkill reality those boring economists always point out. According to Cato Institute data, racking up all this public debt does a fantastic job of crowding out private investment. Basically, the government hogs all the funds in the capital markets. This spikes long-term interest rates, forces future distortionary taxes, and, you guessed it, stokes inflation. You are essentially suffocating your nation's organic economic growth just to fund a political party. We kind of like to think governments have this unlimited credit limit, right? But consider this threshold from the Cato Institute research. For emerging economies, once you hit just a 45% debt to GDP ratio, economic growth actually starts turning negative. That is the exact tipping point where the sheer weight of the debt begins to crush the very economy it was supposedly stimulating. So, what exactly do you do when you inevitably max out the national credit card and hit that threshold? Well, you move to step 2, magic money trees. You turn to a fancy term economists call deficit monetization. In plain English, this just means forcing your previously independent central bank to print brand new money to pay the government's mounting bills. You literally hijack monetary policy for your political goals. The government needs cash? Just hit the print button. Now, naturally, printing mountains of cash creates inflation. Normal, orthodox policy says, hey, raise interest rates to cool down that inflation. But our populist playbook demands the exact opposite, unorthodox policy. You actually cut rates to artificially stimulate the economy and keep the party going. You offer deeply negative real interest rates to force growth, completely ignoring the giant inflation fire you are actively fueling. Let's track how this beautiful disaster unfolds through the World Bank's 3 documented phases of macroeconomic populism. Phase 1 is the high. Short-term stimulus feels amazing. Phase 2 is the hangover. We start seeing pervasive shortages and an extreme acceleration of inflation. Then, phase 3, the crash. Complete capital flight and the demonetization of the economy. The budget violently deteriorates, and suddenly, everyone realizes the government has completely lost control. Which brings us right to step 3, crash the currency. This is where the real magic happens. So you're facing an inevitable currency crisis because you've printed too much money and kept interest rates artificially low. A true populist might stop and think, wait, can't we just legally forbid the exchange rate from dropping? It sounds completely absurd, but politicians actually try to engineer their way out of basic math. Enter Turkey's wildly creative KKM scheme, which was extensively analyzed by the National Bureau of Economic Research. When their currency, the lira, started crashing because they utterly refused to raise interest rates, they cooked up a financial engineering trick. They guaranteed domestic depositors against currency depreciation. Basically, if the currency fell, the government promised to pay the difference. Sure, it temporarily hit the crisis, but all it really did was shift massive exchange rate risks directly onto the taxpayer's tab. This creates what researchers politely call an interconnected destabilizing sequence, or let's just call it what it is, a doom loop. Political pressure forces low interest rates. Those low rates generate soaring inflation and current account deficits. Then, the central bank desperately tries to defend the weak currency by burning through its foreign exchange reserves. And when those reserves run out, boom, you trigger a massive, self-fulfilling sovereign debt and currency crisis. All right, it's time to honor our Hall of Fame inductee, Argentina, a country with a century-long, unparalleled dedication to executing this disastrous playbook flawlessly over and over and over again. The correlation is absolutely undeniable. If you look at the data for the net credit the central bank prints for the government and compare it to the inflation rate, they move in absolute lockstep. From Perón in the 1940s to the Kirchners in the 2000s, as the central bank is forced to print more credit to fund massive populist spending, inflation just spikes completely out of control. It's a perfect, tragic mirror. Let's review Argentina's track record here. They actually entered middle-income status way back in the 1960s. They were on track to transition into a high-income, developed nation. Instead, through a relentless, stubborn commitment to populist stimulus, money printing, and artificially weak currency policies, they trapped themselves. We're talking a massive default in 2001, a record-breaking IMF bailout in 2018, and today, just enduring painful economic volatility. They are literally the ultimate cautionary tale of the middle-income trap. And that leads us to our final section, the inevitable catastrophe. Because eventually the political rally ends, the confetti gets swept up, and the country is left with a brutal, cold, hard hangover. The data from Bill King University is crystal clear here. There is no magic money tree in macroeconomics. Keeping policy rates artificially low to fake economic growth is a guaranteed lose-lose proposition. It just leads to runaway inflation, which ultimately forces much higher long-term interest rates anyway. Artificially weak currencies paired with endless deficit spending always end in a crash. It wipes out people's savings, punishes the working class, and literally sets national development back by decades. Which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question to ponder today. We have over a century of hard data from Latin America, Europe, and Asia proving that this populist playbook of low rates, money printing, and high debt is an absolute, undeniable economic catastrophe. So, why do politicians keep offering it to us? And honestly, more importantly, why do we keep enthusiastically voting for it? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.